I'd just like to start. I'd just like to start as well by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay my respect to elders across time. Um, that they have been the guardians not just of place and of country, but also of stories for a very long time. And that's sort of, I think, a big part of the conversation we're going to be having today is the kinds of stories that we're telling about ourselves and about each other and about the future as well. Um, we said we'd do a very quick run around of intros, even though it's not quite in the spirit of a book club. But Millie, do you want to jump in first? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're joining us from.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm here on the lands of the Muanina people in Lutruwita, Tasmania. I can see Garvey is too with her beanie. It's a bit chilly here today. And yes, I've got the beautiful Kunanya, you might know it as Mount Wellington, behind me. So I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners and the elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I was introducing myself as a carer for my community and my family. I have an unusual kind of family and I don't have children of my own, so I like to throw that in there to sort of mix it up a little bit. And I'm the executive director of Australia Remade, and I always struggle to sort of explain what that is, but I think at the moment a lot of what it is about holding big ideas, thinking about new frameworks for how we can do things differently, and really playing with the idea of like, what does it mean for all of us to be part of that, and to all of us be colleagues or comrades or co-conspirators or whatever word that you want to use, and how we think about the big systems change that needs to happen to create the world we want.
Awesome. Sisonke, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I also am joining you from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I too pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us on the call today. And I too acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. I come from South Africa originally. I've been in Australia for a decade, and I think it's important to say that because I read abundance with two hats. I think about this society often as both an outsider, but obviously also an intimate insider. My children are Australian. My husband is Australian. I live here. I work here. I play here. I'm a writer, and I think a lot about ideas of belonging and fracture, and particularly in this moment as a South African, thinking a lot about healing, how we come together in spite of or because of difficult things. And as someone who works with people on storytelling, I'm based at the Center for Stories here in Northbridge in WA. And so we're always thinking about what a story is and what a story isn't and how stories get made. And so again, reading abundance from that lens was, yeah, super interesting. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Dan.
Hi, folks. I'm Dan Hill. I'm sitting here in my office at the University of Melbourne, which means I'm on the Parkville campus in Melbourne. And so it's on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land in the Eastern Kulin Nation here. So I'd like to also pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize the role of Indigenous knowledges in the academy as well. That's where I am right now. And it's also nice to be able to say to acknowledge the treaty being passed last week in Victoria, which usually you don't get to point out good news at moments like this, but that's a huge step forward. So I want to acknowledge that as well, and all of the people that have worked on that for many, 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 many decades, I guess, but certainly hugely in recent years as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. All right. So I promise that it won't be too much of an interview. We want this to be a little bit more like a book club, as if we've just got together at the bar or in someone's living room and we're having a bit of a chat about the book that we've all read recently. I think the place that we wanted to try and start, because I know that we're all going to have some critical things to say about abundance, was to jump in and try and start with the sort of the charitable reading, the sort of what is it about this book that we think starts in the right place or is aiming at the right thing? even if we maybe have opinions about sort of where it's gone off the rails afterwards. But I might handball to you, Dan, given that you're offbeat and ready to go. Did you want to talk a little bit about anything that you liked about the book to start with?
Like the word abundance. Don't like what they did with it. But I was trying to stick to your question. I think abundance is an interesting word and full of possibility. So, kudos for that. And there are some, early on, I guess, there are some things that are pointed out along the way that they get into it, which is, which I think is useful. So that, I do a lot of work with housing, and they do talk directly that housing should be a human right, which is not how everybody thinks, to be really clear. And it's, and as the book continues, it's not really what they think either, but nonetheless, they do say it at the start. And that's important because that's not said in this country or the UK where I'm from. Really, it's not said explicitly, or if it's said, it's not really meant and then followed through on. Because if we did say that, then and we did mean it, then we wouldn't be having issues with people not having a house or other issues with people having too many houses. So housing as a human right is really important. They do talk about the grand challenges that we're facing, I guess, the systemic challenges or shared societal challenges. They frame that relatively well, I guess, in the early parts of the book again. They talk about government's key role there, or the public sector or the state, or however you want to interpret that, but publicness, I suppose, and its particular role in being able to address those challenges. So again, that comes from I suppose the traditional, let's say, ideological starting point, which is a bit like, if only we could go back to the 1963 World Fairs in New York and kind of have that world again. And, all of the framing of that comes from the idea of this meaningful addressing of big shared challenges, sort of New Deal-ish kind of rhetoric, which I think actually is important personally. The issue again is that they don't really consider the political backdrop or the inequalities that were also present at the time, or who was able to make those great strides in a New Deal or otherwise. But the idea of it, a public shared mission, for want of a less loaded word in Australia, that would be able to address these shared societal challenges together, pulling in the same direction, putting things on the table like housing and infrastructure and cities and neighborhoods, that's all good. All of the issues are in the devil is in the details bit, as in the lack of attention and care as to how did we then do that. But the initial framing is, is sort of, personally, I find, there's some good things in there, but nothing that you wouldn't also get from a million other writers a lot better, I would also say. But at least they're kind of, they start off addressing maybe some useful trajectories or questions, I guess.
Not short on ambition, which I think was
that was a bit mealy-mouthed. I'm trying hard not to be critical, but I'm sort of giving them some credit. But anyway.
No, fair enough. I think, not short on ambition. And I think what I appreciated was, as you said, the publicness, the role of government, and sort of wanting to see strong, muscular, meaningful government, and government taking a role in addressing the key challenges in our lives was really positive. And then, as you said, some of the devil is in the detail. So I think we'll come around to talk about the sort of the big picture vision as well, because I think some of the devil is in the big picture as well in this case.
I guess that just briefly, and then I'll shut up. But I think that is also it wasn't really the strong muscular bit that I was lauding there, because I think they do that as well, and we know that that's congruent with the idea of sort of Kennedy and moonshots and New Deal, but I think that's also clearly the issue. But because I guess what I'm saying is you can address large shared societal challenges, people pulling together without using adjectives like strong and muscular, which have a certain kind of framing. And so I like the idea of the shared agenda and the spirit of the movement almost, rather than the kind of, the kind of Herculean, kind of Ayn Randian sort of Atlas Shrugged vibes that also come from it.
And maybe that's not even what they're saying either. I'm probably giving them too much credit there in any case, that some of what they're doing is pulling back and sort of limiting the power of government in order to get towards the kinds of visions that they have.
Yeah.
But I'll throw the others. What were the things that you liked? What were the things that that felt like they were aimed in the right direction?
Oh, I can jump in if you want. Look, I've actually got I'm going to start with a negative. Sorry, I know you want us to start positive, but I actually don't think it was very ambitious at all. So I'm just going to throw that in there right now, and we can come back to that. But I actually think it was quite unambitious and mediocre. That's my opening lines. But what it has, and I'm nervous actually about talking about its value, because I think it's a dangerous book. And so I just want to put that out first as a kind of preface. And I don't know how many people on the call have actually read it or read much about it, or I can't tell because I can't see your faces. But, in essence, what it does is it starts with a vision for the future 2050, I think. I love the start of a vision. I think that's fantastic. I hate the vision that they offer, and I can come back to that, to why I hate that later, but it makes my skin crawl and I don't want to live there. But I think vision is really important, and there's a great line that I can't remember, but basically, if we don't have a vision, we can't go anywhere. We have to be thinking. We are in really challenging times. They also kind of put out really clearly that we're in a real crisis, and so they talk about housing as a key thing and climate change, and I 100% agree we need to treat these things as crises. I kind of would argue that they are not the only crises, and that if we just view them outside of an analysis of power or an understanding of why they've been created, it's a bit dangerous. I do really love that if you haven't read it, part of what they then do is really question the role of the state and the role of the state as a regulator and the power that the state has. And again, I think they limit their view of what the state is to being simply a regulator. I think we should come back to the state being way more than that. So I think, but it is an important question. What do we want the state to do is a question we absolutely have to be asking right now. Again, I think they're unambitious in that. And the thing that I think people love about it, and it's been picked up, particularly in the US, is that it seems so simple. They've got these really beautiful silver bullet solutions of get rid of red tape and build more things. And again, we can come back to the detail of that, but that is very, very appealing. Who doesn't want a simple solution, right? In a book called Abundance, that word, I can't see it without twitching.
Wouldn't it be nice?
More, but all the things. So I think they're tapping into something. And the other thing, if you haven't read it, that's probably really important to know, is they intentionally set out as a critique of the left. They themselves would consider themselves left. I think they're probably centrist. And if you look at where it's been picked up, it's actually been picked up by the millionaires and billionaires. So I think there's some, I'm going to start with, I think it's dangerous because there are some really good observations in there that are then clouded by, I think, complete failure of imagination and analysis. So that's as positive as I can get. So Suzanne, see if you can help.
It's supposed to be the positive bit, Millie.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm supposed to do vision and hope, but I'll get there.
Yeah, I wouldn't have read this book if it hadn't been for this book club. So I was not one of the people around whom it was doing the rounds. When I of course, my partner had read it, and I heard him sighing and ranting, and I was like, I'm not gonna read this book, but I did because I signed up to the book club, so I had to read it, and I certainly wouldn't have finished it if I hadn't been signed up to the book club. So thank you. And I suppose what I will say in terms, and I think it's really good practice. I think it's incredibly good practice to offer good faith, to engage in a conversation in good faith. And so I think in reaching for something good to say, I it does feel like a reach, right? But I'll do it anyway in the spirit of generosity. I think, so I'm doing a workshop so it's occupying my mind like in the next, in the next hour. After this, I'm just running straight into a workshop, and it's a workshop about listening. So it's a community sort of workshop about storytelling and listening. And the exercise we're going to be doing today asks people to listen to someone else speak in silence, and then to think about what they have said. And I'm going to give them all little slips of paper. And so whatever's on your paper is what you're thinking about as you listen. And so you're either listening with your head, or listening with your heart, or listening with your feet. Head is for facts, information. So when you feed them back, you're asking questions and prompting them around like the intellectual stuff. If you're listening with your heart, then you're listening to them about their feelings. Like, what is it that they feel? What is it that they are trying to express, whether it's verbally and non-verbally? And then if you're listening with the feet, then you're thinking about intention. Where do they want to go, right? And so if I think about how I would respond to this book as an act of radical listening, then I feel like at the level of facts, there are many. Right? So there's lots of facts and lots of detail and lots of information here. And some of that, that you get along the way is important and useful and interesting. If we listen to it at the level of hope, then of heart, then I think what I hear is a lot of hope. I don't agree with where that heart is, but I don't want to diminish the importance of that intention. And that vision that they lay out at the beginning also made my skin crawl and feels incredibly consumerist and deeply disturbing in so many ways. But I also recognize that it comes from a place that is written by Americans who are so much in their orientation around consumption and around creating, sort of inventing our way out of crises. And so I'll put that aside, because that's an analysis head level kind of critique, and I want to honor, right, the act of radical listening and what it means to be engaged in a debate with people whose ideas you disagree with deeply. And then lastly, I think at the level of the feet, so what is the intention? Where do they want to move us? Again, I think that's if I'm listening with that ear, it's probably, they want to solve, right? So there's an attempt at a pragmatism. Now, whether or not they get the pragmatism right is a different question altogether, but that's clearly the intention. So that's my attempt to be as gracious and as this is me before the wine.
I love that. That's a really lovely practice to share with the group as well, of that. Yeah, the radical listening. I love that. And I feel like you've done the best out of all of us of genuine generosity and kindness towards the book. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, like thinking about my sort of heart as I'm sort of like coming into this conversation, I feel like there was something you spoke to about, not wanting to diminish the hope. I think there is something that doesn't feel good about coming into a conversation where, like, it seems to have really energized people, I think, including on the left. And you were saying, Millie, that it's been picked up as much on the right. But I think like it feels like a positive, and they've framed it at least as a really progressive vision, and it's giving people energy. And coming in and sort of poo-pooing that doesn't feel the best, It's like we've got so little hope already to come in and stomp on the hope that people are offering. It doesn't, there's something about that feels challenging. And so I do want us to sort of we'll try and bring it around to some of the places where we can find some hope, and where we can sort of find that maybe on more solid ground by the end of this conversation, hopefully.
And I guess, I think the thing about hope is that there are many strains and many ways to be hopeful. And so, we'll talk about this when we talk about storytelling, but the thing to do is to find the threads of hope that do align with the head and the feet, right? So I think that there is some misalignment, and that's where, so that you can critique without saying that your critique diminishes your own sense of hope, right? So yeah, just to say that yeah, I think both are possible. Yeah.
I don't think we have to give them too much credit, to be fair.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's many more people that have
Yeah.
spoken about hope far more cogently than they have, and
Yeah.
then acted upon it as well, you know. And in reality, I think they're so uncritical about their setting, really, that it's almost like wearing a t-shirt with hope written on it, but they're holding a flamethrower, and they don't really realize that they're holding a flamethrower, but they're wearing a t-shirt with hope on it, you know. And so it's sort of,
Yeah.
I think it's, and I don't know if it's conscious, I don't know if it's lazy, I don't know if it's insecurity, I don't know if it's just, you know, with America, it's always nostalgia. That's one of their key national assets, you know, so that's also driving things there as well. But yeah, I think I agree entirely, Sisonko. I think you are being the most magnanimous out of all of us and doing a good job about excavating hope from the ruins that they created. But
I mean, I think isn't that what is missing from the book is any mess. Like the book is very, very sanitized. The vision is very, very sanitized. Like, you know, the opening vision includes you wake up, you open your window, you hear the hum of electricity outside you. Like, I would kill someone if that's the, like, if, you know, like, no, I wouldn't actually, but, you know, like, with delivery drones that are like hummingbirds in the sky. I want a real hummingbird. And I think I love this approach of thinking about the purpose and the heart, because I think that means we can settle into generosity. But why do we cheer on mediocrity all the time? We are in a crisis, and this is mediocre work. I'm just going to go straight for the kill at this point. I know we're only, you know, 20 minutes in, but I just think, I don't think we have to be that gracious, actually. I think we have to be alert to the fact that we even feel we have to be particularly gracious shows that this is a powerful book. And the fact that I think it is, you know, it's a powerful book that has no analysis of power. So one of the things that they talk about is, there's this great horrible quote that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's basically like, so I think they have this model that is based on cures, construction, and competition. Now, the Australia Remade version of that is care, connection, and contribution. So we're starting from a radically different position. So I kind of feel like they've got the framework wrong, and then the policy dressings just don't fit because the underlying bit I don't think is good. And they have, I'm about to lose my train of thought. Oh, no, I've completely lost it, I think. I was so on my bandwagon that I got distracted by the seas.
We love it. We like to see it.
I've got it. So they've got this idea. One of the things they say is we will be letting down future generations if we don't invent more, if we don't invent more cures. And I like, at that particular point, I'm like, holy crap, like, you know, people are dying because they can't, in the US, because they can't get access to insulin, which is a known thing, right? So no more cures are going to help. I mean, more cures for, you know, my husband has an incurable chronic illness, like that'd be great, more cures, please. But so, and they have this thing of,
Does no good if we can't access them, right?
That's right. And they have this thing of like, what if they said redistribution is just not relevant. We need more production. And, you know, I know Catherine Trebek's on the call, but like that idea of not just redistribution, but pre-distribution. And, you know, again, one of their key things is if we just, I'm surprised at how naive it is when they say, you know, a key thing we need to have is more renewable energy. And if we have more renewable energy, then everyone will be really rich and everyone will be so wealthy in energy that everything will be awesome. And you look around, I mean, particularly being in Australia, we are so rich in so many things, and yet some people can't access any of it. And so it completely denies the fact that there are people who have a real intention to hoard power, to have power and control. And that is completely absent from the book, is any analysis of why we are in this pickle and where power is. So I actually think to be too kind to it is to do ourselves a disservice. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I tried my best, and
That's over now. That chapter's done.
Couldn't agree with you more. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think as I said, I think the intentions, they come from a place of, you know, trying to do all this good stuff, but clearly wrongheaded in so many different ways. I just wanted to pick up on something that Dan had said earlier, which was around us, you know, at least they recognize it, you know, housing as a human right. And actually, the thing that I found interesting was that they recognize housing as a human right, but underneath that, what they're not recognizing is that the right is dignity, right? So if the real right is dignity, then no matter what it is that you're trying to build, no matter what it is that you're trying to invent, then you're concerned with equity. Then you're concerned and you're interested in power and who gets to consume and who doesn't, right? And so, as you say, Millie, it doesn't engage at all with power. It doesn't seek to shift anything. And what it in fact poses a risk of doing is deregulating, is emasculating, and again, that language is complicated, right? But is destroying the capacity of states to do what little they can do in the era of the oligarch, which it doesn't engage with either. So there's there's a story that it's trying to tell, which is a story about, how, regulation is the enemy, and how people on the left are, have fallen into this trap of trying to, lawyer our way into justice. And that's never going to happen because, we're constraining the capacity for the state to do what it's, supposed to do. So that's the story they're trying to tell. At the same time, they don't tell the story of the rise of all the corporate and oligarchical interests that have simultaneously, in the very moment that they're giving us the analysis, have also been rising, right? So,
Exactly.
so yeah, not, So the choice of threads, I read somewhere that abundance is like an attempt to kind of tell the story of policy in a Malcolm Gladwell way. And I thought it was such a good description because it's like this insane amount of like crazy threads that don't necessarily have to link up, but then Malcolm Gladwell will make them all, he will fucking squeeze them into. It's like, do these things really belong together? So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's that sort of, it's the same kind of, I can't remember which one you said actually, but this simplifying, it was Millie, it was you, it's sort of this, it feels like a sort of TED Talks, it's not even good enough for a TED Talk, it's just sort of, it's just so light in terms of, it takes on something like housing and then it doesn't think for 1 second about what's really going on there. So its approach is deregulation. I mean, leaving aside the idea of an amount of regulation being good or bad is a really strange thing to say. Like the direction of the regulation isn't something they talk about at all, except to strip it away. So they dismantle state capacity, however we want to frame that, or government or governance more broadly, at every single step. And we need less of this, we need less of the governance, we need less of the policy. We'll just let the private sector rip, we'll make loads more houses, then everybody can have a house. And it's like, that does not happen. We already have nearly 1 million empty houses in Australia. We have, 1.3 million houses with 3 or more spare bedrooms in Australia already. We've got an abundance of housing space actually in Australia, and people do not have access to those houses at all. So just pouring more onto it does not make it more equitable, and they don't seem to reconcile that at all at any point. To think about, well, if you wanted to make, say, housing affordable, you need to make affordable housing, which is really public housing or not-for-profit housing, like cooperative or shared housing. And we already have the lowest amounts of that in Australia and the US you could have. We can't go any lower on those fronts. And they're not sort of offering anything on that basis, really. Again, it's just sort of let private sector rip. And then it's the sort of solipsistic view that's often the case with Americans, sorry to say, but not always, not in all instances, but in this case, they don't, like for instance, a model like Housing First in Finland, which is basically so simple and pragmatic, is if you're homeless in Finland, you get given a house and then you're not homeless. And that's that. And it's no strings attached. It's called the right to your front door. So to your point, Sisongi, dignity is what's driving that, right? So don't ask any complex questions. Don't, make you fill in loads of forms to get it. And then they're the only European country where homelessness has been decreasing in the last 10, 15 years. And that saves money for the state, actually, as it happens. It actually makes a profit, it turns out. Should you not be convinced by the ethical and the dignity argument, which I'd argue you should be convinced by. But even if you wanted the rational bit, it saves money that then would either be spent on social care and crime and everything that is the cost of homelessness, if you like, to society. So by giving people a house, they have a home and they can build their lives on their own terms. It also works better for society. That is not mentioned at any point in the book. It's not possible to imagine that. And then the last thing I'll shut up is there's one line in there on public housing, and they say in Singapore, something like 80% of the population live in public housing, which is true. And then they say, but that has a bad reputation in America. And so anyway, it's like there's no, that's it. There's no attempt to how would we change the reputation? How would we make some, beautiful public housing? Or how would we, there's no attempt to wrestle with that idea. It's just, well, we can't do that as America. Apparently, we're not innovative enough in America to do either of those two cases I just mentioned. So that's that, and they just give up. So nearly to your point, deeply unambitious. No idea to reframe what housing or home might mean, as you said, Sisongo, in a dignified way at all. No interest in it.
I think there was also, picking up on a couple of things, I think Sisonke, something you said, which was about, I can't remember what exactly you said, but something to do with the way that, one of their answers is deregulation. And also it is very much an American book for America. And I think we need to be really careful about what we translate to Australia, because I know, Dan, you've talked about, we just have such a different context when it comes to housing in some ways. And I think kind of also being aware, so someone in the comments has said, so deregulation. So one of the big arguments in the book is that we just need to get out of the way, and government needs to be, government, public money, private interest just needs to be able to build. And they say things like, we get these, the citizens are getting in the way of building, the NIMBYs, they're not in my backyards because, the lefty wealthy communities don't want public housing, they're blocking everything. So there's this story that one, government regulation is the problem and needs to be removed. And two, citizens are blocking the development of things because they don't want high-speed rail on land or whatever it is. And I think while it is definitely worth thinking about what are the regulations and policies that help or hinder developments that we want, I think that's a good question. And there was an interesting, Ken Henry gave a speech at the press club where he was really riffing off abundance, actually. But the thing that I thought saved what he was saying was he was talking about we actually have to think about the impacts at a whole of country scale and a whole of what are we trying to do as a country, not just how many houses do we want to build or everything. But I think, again, coming back to why I think the book is dangerous, is in a context where we're talking about deregulation, we're in a time where deregulation is being weaponized essentially by big corporations trying to make a lot of money and gain a lot of power. So while we might need to deregulate some things, I think being aware of that context at the same time, and the book kind of echoes this, the book blames citizens for a whole lot of failures of public development. We're also at a time when citizens are really being squashed in their ability to contribute, whether it's, because of protest rights being, all of those things. So I think, again, how we interpret it, what we do with what they say is really important, even if we were to follow elements of it. And again, Dan, you made this point, I think, in your paper that you shared with us earlier. We're in a climate crisis, and building more and more is contributing to the climate crisis when there's a redistribution issue. So I think thinking about that feels really important. And to come back to the thing I was saying about the 3 C's, so I feel like they've got the cures, they've got the construction and competition. It's quite individualized. It's very capitalist. I think it's neoliberal, but a new kind of, it's a sort of a throwback to neoliberalism in its apparent glory days. And I think if we really change that, and so the work that I've been doing is on, people, when we asked people about the future that they wanted, the thing that we heard is, beyond anything, I heard from people, I want a place where the coffee is free. I want to belong without having to fit in. I want to connect to people and place. I want to care and be cared for. I want to contribute. People want to be the citizens. They want to have that shared ownership. And so I think if you started there, you would then have very different policy. You know, it's like what you said, Sizonke, about it's not the housing, it's the dignity. That's what we're after. And I would encourage you all to not read Abundance, but read a book I've just read called Solidarity, which is by Lee Hunt Hendricks and Astra Taylor. And I think it is the flip to Abundance, and they talk a lot about they come back to the role of the state, and they invite that expansion. And I'd be really interested in what you all think about Sizonke and Dan and Matt, about what do you think the role of the state is, because the authors of Solidarity talk about the state is also, it sets culture. What if we had a state that its whole purpose was about making us more prone to care for each other? Like, what if that was the purpose? What if our institutions were set up for that? And they go through these amazing examples of where that has happened. So I just think there's, in some ways, we could sort of, for all the critiques of Abundance, we could almost push it aside and say, look, nice try, guys, but actually you sort of started building it on the wrong floor. Like, here's a better floor. So anyway, interested in your thoughts of what you think the role of the state are, sort of bouncing off that stuff.
So it's somewhat connected, but I wanted to pick up on a thread that you were talking about just then, Millie, around the building more and more is actually contributing to part of the crisis. Like, I think a lot of the buttons that they're pushing to try and, the simple solutions are innovation in a very limited sense and production, right? It's like we need to produce more of stuff. And there's a real ignorance of the sort of global reality that we're in right now, not just with the climate crisis, but biodiversity and all the other sort of planetary boundaries that we're pushing, that actually production, particularly in countries like America, where the book is aimed at, is a big part of the problem and is contributing to that. And we're going to be, pretty heavily regulated by the planet if we keep heading in the wrong direction on that stuff. And so I think there was something for me, like there's a very a laughable sort of 2-page attack on the degrowth movement in the book that I don't think is even worth talking about the sort of how robust that is. But I wonder, like, it feels to me like part of what the state should be in the coming decades is less of the sort of separate to the people, as you said, suppressing people's ability to actually influence what's going on, and much more of the sort of like collective governance within limits is going to need to be what statehood and what governance is sort of like our ability to come together and work out how do we want to manage things, provide for each other's needs within the sort of very real biophysical limits of the planet in ways that provide for all that stuff that people really want and is really important to us. But I think coming back to the sort of limited definition of innovation that's sort of on offer in the book, it feels like innovation, the only thing that they're talking about, and this is what really struck me about that sort of nightmarish opening vision of the book, is that everything that's changed is technologies and nothing about the way that we actually live and the way that we work together and the way that we provision for each other's needs has been innovated on. This is another like lack of ambition, is that they're big on technology change and technology innovation, but there's nothing about how we might innovate our social practices and how we might innovate our provisioning systems and our economic systems and our business models and all the other things. I think that's actually where, to take us into the what else instead of this, like that's where it feels like we need so much innovation. Yes, maybe some technologies and some new sort of, cures to diseases and things like that. But so much of the innovation we need is actually in that space of the sort of, the social practices and systems, I think. Not quite a direct answer to your question. Sorry, Millie. So people can pick up on that or on the sort of the role of the state stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Millie's right. I mean, when I said that I wouldn't have actually read this book, that's what I was gesturing towards. That I think that there is something about giving so much oxygen to a set of ideas that are already in wide circulation. And the seduction of the book is the way that the story is told. So the pop TED Talk style kind of format makes it feel like you're swallowing something, consuming something, and that, oh, wow, it's so simple, it's so easy. And the thing that you are swallowing is really pernicious. So I do think there is something important to be said about working around that. At the same time, as I said in my kind of opening comments, like, I think it is important to recognize when something is in circulation and is taken seriously. And I think it's important to read it with an open, with an open heart, even if it is to then say, wow, could not disagree more. To your question around, the role of the state, I'm always often thinking about my own country, South Africa, and thinking about what the role of the state, there was in the aftermath of apartheid. And we are a country with a lot of problems, but central. No, sorry. I don't know how to switch this off.
We can't hear it.
Let me go on mute and finish my thought.
We can't hear it anyway, but that's all right.
We can't hear it, whatever you're hearing.
Okay, it's this voicemail that's coming on. Okay, sorry, very distracting, sorry.
Sure.
So, in the aftermath of apartheid, the South African state became a state that had to care for its citizens because people had not been counted before, right? There had never been a census that counted Black people. They had never, because why would you bother counting Black people when you don't have to provide services to them, right? No water, no sanitation, no housing, et cetera, et cetera. So the role of the state really became one of building the infrastructure, but more than building, more than kind of trying to invent our way out of a crisis, the role of the state was to help people think through what it meant to live a dignified life. And so that's why the word dignity comes to me so quickly, because our Constitution was founded in the notion of dignity. And that's in a context and in a situation where people were, starved of rights for such a long time. I think Australia is in a very different, scenario. The timeframes may be different, but clearly, I think the impetus for the state to do precisely that is really, really important. So, state does set the culture, and there is not a single, South African that you will find today who doesn't understand and accept the role of the state as one who doesn't know the Constitution, right? Pocket constitutions in everyone's pocket. Someone would try to ask you a question, and people in the early days would pull out the Constitution from their pocket and flip through it and point to you the part in the Constitution that applied to them. So I think, Millie, to your question, the state does set culture, and the role of the state is, in an ideal scenario, a caring one that is about creating a public good. And innovation, I think, is in some ways only becomes a function of a state that enables people to have dignity, right? It's the air, it's the oxygen. And then, then other things become possible. Yeah.
I want us to open up to the crowd soon. So yeah, I feel like maybe if we try and do one more round, and if we're trying to sort of like start reaching towards this piece of like, so if not this agenda, what is the other thing? I mean, Millie, you pointed to, maybe it's solidarity rather than abundance, but is there something like, what would we rather direct people towards, if not this direction?
Can I have a crack at the state question as well? But it's because I think there's something missing here as well, and it also reflects on Australia. So I was kind of mean about America earlier, and I'll do a very dangerous thing of being a British person, mean about Australia, but because it's Britain's fault, obviously, ultimately. There's a lot in Australian culture which is quite American, obviously, in this respect. When it comes to the role of the state, we are one of the countries with the lowest taxation rates. We're one of the smallest public sectors. So it's very, very neoliberal here as well. I don't mean Australians are. I just mean that the way that we craft the system is. And that's, our housing is overwhelmingly private. We're pretty much at the lowest end of the OECD again for public housing. As you know, our private schooling market is out of control at like 40% of secondary school kids. That's a huge anomaly globally for other comparative countries. You know, compared to the UK, where it's like 7%, it's 5 times more here. So we have this kind of same set of issues that are, you know, maybe more American in that sense. And I'm sort of saying this from the perspective of just, you know, being very clear about my Europeanness. So in all of its majesty and horror simultaneously. So before I moved to Australia, I used to work in the Swedish government. I worked there for a few years in Stockholm. And so the kind of state for me was interesting because I saw it be playing out in a different way. And it mainly local, actually. So in Sweden, you know, the key bit of government is the municipality. That's who you pay your taxes to. That's who you have the strongest relationship with. They provide education for free, public transport, housing, energy. All of those things are quite often owned in public by the municipality. And then, you know, you're part of that, essentially. They belong to the city. You're part of the city. They belong to you. So it's completely different framing. And regional government does health and things like that. Sort of makes sense. But the national government more or less does foreign stuff, a bit of military. And though, again, I forget, maybe Sisonge's point, it does culture setting or direction setting, or, you know, the way that we frame the idea of a nation is something done at that level as well. So that's the opposite of Australia, where the municipality is the most underfunded bit. You know, there's hardly anybody there. You know, it's the complete opposite. And so we do have these issues here about the way that they play out in Australia, which is worth calling out. I think Richard Dennis does this really well at the Australia Institute. He points out, again, with Sweden, it's like 51% of the GDP is public sector. But that just means that things that Australians have to pay for themselves are part of the public. They're public goods. So you sort of pay for education here. In Sweden, that's just part of the public. You know, it's sort of, that's how we pay for it as a country. You pay for it so everybody can have it. Same with housing. And actually it's better, you know, for what it's worth, the grades are better, the kids do better, the kids are happier in the public system, not in the private system. That isn't talked about here. I don't recall in Australia a politician talking about that as a major problem. And in fact, actually, we know that the government purse is often funding private schooling in some weird way that doesn't make sense. And it's the same with housing again. And of course, in the book, they say, well, we have to get all of that government stuff out of the way because then we can enable productivity in the private sector. And private sector is really good at being efficient and productive. And that's just nonsense. You know, so in like Sweden, again, the last 25 years, the private sector productivity has been twice that of Australia's, with all of that going on. So you pay more tax in Sweden, you have a much stronger state involved in giving you everyday goods like healthcare and education and so on. And also you get a private sector out of it making things like IKEA and H&M and Spotify and stuff like that. It doesn't, you know, they don't talk about that ever. It's like that's a different planet somehow. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we can't do any of those things. It's like, well, why? Why? Because of culture. There's no, you know, Americans are the same DNA.
That's not popular here, Dan. So anyway, moving on.
It's just like when they talk about eating meat and they say, well, we know that one of the biggest things to do, and I'm a meat eater, what it's worth, but they say that, I mean, not all the time, obviously, not insane, but they just say that one of the biggest things we could do for the climate would be to stop eating meat. And yet they go, well, but then people really like eating meat. So it's just a big shrug emoji about the most complex thing. They just give up straight away. And then they say, well, I have to do something else. So they don't really look at the idea of what the state is at all. They have no space for that other idea. And I'm not saying Sweden is the answer, by the way. I'm just saying that it's another model which is available along with South Africa, along with numerous others. And we could look at those and say what would work for the condition we're in now and the kind of challenges we're facing. And you wouldn't use the toolkit of the late 19th century, mid 20th century to try and tackle the challenges we're facing now, because that's the toolkit that created those challenges. It's like trying to put out a fire with a blowtorch. It's just, like, how is it going to happen? The mechanism that created climate change is now going to magically not create climate change. It sort of can't be done. But they're not interested in that. Sorry, you got me going. What about states?
So Sonke, Millie, I think we're copping flack in the chat for being overly negative. So see if you can bring us home before we bring people in for questions. What's our vision instead? What do we want rather than what we don't like? We don't all have to have the same one, but
yeah, I think I think people should read Dan's piece when it's published, because I think that's got a really both imaginative and super pragmatic, which is you don't often find at the same time, vision, which is to work within what we've got, is to imagine a way to house more people in dignified ways without building more and emitting more. I'm probably not saying it as succinctly and wonderfully as Dan has said it, but
You're an actual writer, so you said it much better than I did.
So I think that's the way to do it. But to Millie's point, like, the way to do that is culture shift, and what they don't engage in at all is any recognition that we cannot consume or invent ourselves out of this crisis, that this is in fact a crisis of consumption. It is a crisis of capitalism reaching far past its logical conclusion, and that in fact, when we begin all of these conversations that we have with an acknowledgement of country, what we are acknowledging is a way that equity and respect and connection to country worked before, and that doesn't require innovation. It requires a return to a sort of set of first principles. And so I think that's where the book kind of profoundly meanders off script, like from the beginning. And so I think, if I'm going to say, like, what's the good that we can do, I think it is to redirect our attention. I think it is to put this book in its proper place. And that is to recognize that it comes with, as I tried to frame in the beginning, like, if you try to listen with generosity to what they're trying to say, what they're trying to give us is a set of tools around hope, and that they're wrong-headed about that the analysis is like that. There's so many things that don't work about that, but that the basis of engagement for anybody, there was this very difficult conversation that Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates had recently, which was around his appalling response to, Charlie Kirk. And what impressed me about Ta-Nehisi Coates in that conversation is that he engaged in good faith with a generosity that I found remarkable, but that I learned from in the watching of it. So I didn't learn anything from Ezra Klein. Sorry, can we close my door? Louisa, can you close my door, please? Sorry. My door, can I close it? I'm still on my call. Sorry. This is life. Sorry, this is working for a nonprofit. So there's a way that we can engage with one another and say very hard things with a generosity that recognizes where we come from, but that says, I completely could not disagree with you more, because your analysis is superficial, actually. That's what it ultimately comes down to. The path that we are going to, that you're taking us on, is not a path I agree with, but I get that you're trying to do something good. So let's move from this is base camp, right? We move from there.
Mm.
I think, Susanka, that addresses, sorry, I'm reading the comments at high speed, but I think someone has said, if we were engaging with the authors of this book in real life, we would probably be more collegial, more generous. I mean, I hope we would still go as hard. I really like to think we wouldn't. And, I think someone had written, what if, it's like if a child had brought us something they'd done, we'd encourage them to grow from it. I would say the thing in this case is they're not children. They're actually quite powerful men. So there is I agree with respecting the ideas and where it comes from, but I think they're men with real power, beyond what, sorry, everyone on the call, I think what the rest of us have. But in terms of, Susanka, I think, again, like you being interrupted, like, that's it, right? Isn't that what we want? Like, isn't that the future that we want? I want it to be more human, not less human. I want it to be more, I want to be able to take my mask off and not have to perform at work and then pretend I don't, have a disabled husband and a chaotic life. Like that is the future I want, more than I want drones delivering me things. So I think in terms of where we go from here, I really think it's about flipping it from the three C's of, cures, construction, competition, which, I started with my own three C's of care, connection, and contribution. Coincidentally, they had three C's in theirs. I didn't invent them. It's like to make that very clear. It wasn't just convenient C's. And I think, I agree we have problems. Great, we agree on that. I think the problems they point out are important problems. I would add power and inequality as being other problems as well. So I just build on that. They have a really techno-utopian vision with no limits to growth. I would be like, actually, I think my vision is about how do we be more human? How do we love more loudly? How do we care more ferociously? How do we do our work more softly? All of these things, because why are we alive otherwise? Like, I don't get why. This is the point, right? And I think there's a role for the state to facilitate that. As Susanki said, the state is powerful, but we are also the state. How we react is also, we should do that. And I think that if we did look at, well, what does it look like to put care, connection, contribution, and an infrastructure for that? So instead of building 50 million concrete things, what if we built time? What if we had an infrastructure for time, like 4-day work week, for a house if you're homeless? Like, what does that infrastructure for care look like, for connection, for contribution, to allow us to be the citizens that everybody I talk to, I'm a social scientist, everyone wants that. So I think we kind of got these answers, but it's going to take this real courage to go from this like building is the only way to space and time is infrastructure, and I want to get this tattooed across my eyeballs, the coffee is the work. Where is the infrastructure for the coffee with someone? And, in the disaster work we've done, people knowing their neighbors literally saves lives. It's not a joke like that. That enables the efficiency of the tech. So I think that like we could have that. We just have to kind of be brave enough. It's right there. And so, I think there's this, what if we reoriented the state? What if we had as our conversation, we want the state to give a solidarity state, a solidarity infrastructure, and one that looked at public things and public people. What does it look like for us to step into those things? So I just think there is so much room that sure, we can say abundance makes a good start. I don't even think it's that, but we could. It's a conversation. It's made me think. It's my job to think about it, but. So I think we could move from beyond abundance to solidarity, and I really, really recommend reading that Lee Hunt Hendricks and Astra Taylor book, because to me it is the missing piece here. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll make sure we share that afterwards with people. I have invited folks to put up your hands if you'd like to jump in and ask a question. I might unpin us and sort of technologically open up the space so that we can see a few more people. And put up your hand, and we'd love to hear from you if you've got a question that you'd like to ask all of us, or a comment. It doesn't normally people are really strict about this, but it doesn't have to be a question if you want to jump in with a comment as well that people might want to respond to. Under React, the little love heart in your menu is where you'll find the hands up bit, or you can just turn on your camera and put up your actual physical hand, and if we see it, we'll call on you. Sarah Barley, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So you might be able to tell from my accent, I am American. I live in Australia and have for 7 years. But it is not surprising to me at all that it is popular in the US. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to me about it is I don't really know who it's for, because it asks absolutely nothing of individuals reading it. Like, there is no ask of anyone to change anything about their lives except to kind of like get out of the way and advocate for progress and tech. And I think that's part of why it's popular. It like feels like you've read something that feels like you're supporting important change, but doesn't ask anything of you, and you don't have to change anything about your life. And yeah, I don't know. I actually, I had a really, really strong reaction to it. And there was just a quote right at the beginning of it that I thought was really just kind of really telling of, it feels like a little bit of the gap in their kind of thinking, which it's talking about the it refers to kind of a utopian thinking, and that there's one really good exception, worthy exception, which is fully automated luxury communism. I don't know if you remember that reference at the beginning, but it basically says like, it's a political question as much as a technological one. The same technologies could become accelerators of inequality and despair if they're not embedded in just policies and institutions. But then there's never anything about the just policies or institutions. So I'm like, they recognize that gap, but then don't do anything to address it. So anyway, yeah, not surprised it's popular. I think tech as savior is very popular in the US because, again, it doesn't ask anything of us. And I think that crisis of consumption that you were talking about, Sasanke, is like that it's a crisis of consumption and meaning, because the meaning in the US has been completely displaced by centering consumption, and this asks us in no way to engage with that. And so, yeah, anyway, I'll stop there so other people can share, but just wanted to, yeah, and all the critiques of America, Dan, are fully endorsed.
It's not all Americans, just to be clear.
Yeah, no.
No, I think that's a great framing, Sarah. Thank you. That's like it's a really good way of putting it. That, and this is why I think I just flicked through some of the comments. People are saying that it's such a political message. Like what could be the best political message for now except something that doesn't ask you to do anything hard? You know, like that is populism essentially. And so I don't think they really mean that perhaps, but it's interesting that in the US, the first things that have happened have not been a return of public housing or, you know, cooperative energy grids and things. It's been an abundance institute created by Charles Koch, no pun intended, the huge fossil fuel denying billionaire many times over. There's been an abundance conference, which is created by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. I mean, that's where the abundance word has been taken very quickly and co-opted by people who are deliberately trying to create a sort of frictionless existence for their own benefit. And so, because it doesn't ask people to think about anything hard at all. It's it's very interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that.
And I just, one like last little thing is, I don't know if this term has been used about it, but I thought a lot about pop psychology books, which are like kind of reductionist ways sometimes, often, of thinking about like really important real concepts, and then they get taken and repackaged and TikToked and Instagrammed, and it's like a cultural kind of reduction and dumbing down of really important concepts that then get reshared at that level. And that's what I have heard a bit of and see a bit of with this book. And it's obviously not for like policy wonks, so it's kind of like policy light. I don't know. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, but it really struck me as like the policy version of pop psych books, which I like, but aren't always helpful for the outcomes that they kind of are positioned around addressing.
But it's it's interesting where it's been picked up. Like the Labor Party here has really centered a lot of things, certainly on the language, if not their real interpretation, which is kind of interesting. But
yeah,
I think in fairness, it's as easy for us to take it down for being simplistic as it is for them to write a simplistic book, you know. And I think that's maybe where some of the sort of comments that we're getting were coming from. And I think sort of like that pointing to, I think the real challenge and the real difficulty is working out how to do governance well in a way that doesn't slow down the things that we need to be able to do, in a way that enables us to sort of like address challenges rapidly, because we do have urgent crises to address, and which still enables us to sort of like be putting the right structures in place to constrain negative activities and making sure that we're respecting the limits that we need to respect and all that thing. I think that's, it's the questions that the book didn't address very well, and that we maybe haven't addressed in great depth either, but we could probably point to lots of people who are. That's a whole other conversation about what good governance looks like in the midst of the poly crisis. Tarania, is that, I might be mispronouncing that, but I'd love to invite you in.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, look, I think, thank you, Millie, for saying it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous. I absolutely agree with you. I I was, when it first came out, I don't know, when I first noticed it, I was seeing all these positive comments on my LinkedIn feed, and then I thought I better listen to a podcast about it, and then I thought, what is, and I was just really disturbed by, and I didn't think it was just from the right, Millie, because to me, it was a lot of my colleagues who were saying, yeah, this is a fantastic book. This is what we should do. Oh my God, yeah, government should get out of the way. And so I actually think by people speaking about it here, it brings balance into the broader what's happening out there. Because I'm actually not seeing, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed there's a few articles here and there since then. But generally, I'm seeing much more positive feedback about it. Jim Chalmers has taken it up. So when I say it's dangerous, I don't mean, I mean it, and I'm sure in the way that Millie meant it, as in, we need to really think about what's going on here. This is about much more than a book. This is about what is the conversation we're having. Can we properly critique what is going on in our society? Look at currently what's happening with AI, where it's being foisted on us, and we can hardly say, hold on a minute, is this what we want? Is there another way forward? Can citizens, can community have a say? Not more than a say. Can we steward this, or can we at least co-steward this? Can we co-steward, the way our society is running, because it's been running without us, really. So, and that's what you've been raising as well, and what the book talks about NIMBYism, but but it sort of blames community for what's been going on, and when in fact it is the oligarch, it's the capture. And I was so pleased, Millie, and you know this, when I came across, I was on a LinkedIn feed, and you pushed back. You were like the only person pushing back on this LinkedIn feed. I couldn't find the language. I couldn't find the words. I was feeling quite distressed, and I couldn't find the words. I hadn't read enough. Maybe I'm not generally well read enough. But I thought, thank God Millie's done that. And I said it, and I'm just saying, I think that we are at a time where we need to step up, and we need to say, what are the narratives that are, that we're living by, and that we need to challenge. And that doesn't, and we can do that. We can do that with, Ezra, and in the room. We can do it with others in the room. We need to do it with each other. If we see this today as part of, a bigger conversation that's going on, it's just creating balance. That's what I want to say. Thanks. Sorry, I obviously feel quite strongly about this, but there you go. I do laugh a lot, honestly.
That's all right. Us too. Does anyone want to jump in before we go to Jethro? No, let's do it.
Agree. Hard agree.
I think probably from my comments you can see that I think that I am seeing this as this book as a political argument more than it is a actual vision, one that people and in the context of the left wing scrambling for a narrative that makes sense more broadly than within its own bubble. And I wonder if you all off the cup would be up for playing with a different narrative that might do the same job, because my sense is that that's the reason that our political class has been so captured by it, is not because the ideas are, extraordinary in any way, shape or form, but because, oh, here's a narrative that might work.
Can you say the question again? I don't know exactly what the ask.
Well, it's what's an alternative narrative?
What's an alternative narrative that that the punters would buy outside of the bubble?
I mean, I think it's a very, very simple question, but a very, very hard question, because you could even say, is the issue of the idea that we need to come up with a narrative? So, even I would say, if I just talk about things I know there's a lot of things I don't know about in the book, but the one bit that I can speak to is this housing question. I'm not sure it's a very simple narrative framed issue, this one. I would say probably the answer would be for a housing policy for Australia that made sense. I don't think it's Albo standing up with 29 better words than Ezra Klein's better words. I think it's probably something like a citizens' assembly working towards what's a fair, equitable, sustainable, and healthy housing future for Australia. I can come up with one should you want, but then what do I do? Do I just email it to you and then you know what I mean? Or do I email it to Albo and he forwards it on to all of Australia? So it's not really about the story, I think. And that's our mistake sometimes, is that we've obviously, I'm not saying you've done this, Jethro, but I think generally we've got into this mode of saying, who's the best storyteller here? And maybe that is a deeply human thing, but it doesn't really solve any of these complex challenges now. And I would say there's probably a better way of doing that. Things like citizens' assemblies are actually much better placed to deal with very complex systemic challenges, as opposed to, say, elected representatives who usually have to come up with a narrative that plays to the people that elect them. That can work for some things, but it can't work for complex things. And so, how does gay marriage get onto the legislature in somewhere like Ireland through a citizens' assembly process? Like growing up in the UK, in the vicinity of Ireland, I never thought that would happen, frankly. And if it had gone through the normal political process, I don't think it would have happened. But a citizens' assembly managed to make that happen. So short of saying, here's the answer, because I think just coming up with a glib answer is not that you're asking me to, but that again, what do I do with that? Just make a poster of it or something? But it's about how do we do the work to come to the narrative, these answers to these complex systemic challenges. And there's probably different ways we want to think about that don't rely on the convincing storyteller, because that's led to, in a way, where we are now, I suspect.
Yeah, just to jump in there to amplify what you've just said, Dan, I think to speak to Jethro's point, that's exactly the problem. I think part of the issue with this book is that it's a triumph of narrative over substance, right? And if so storytelling, so a story is events plus meaning, right? It's that's the simple equation of what a story is. And so a story can either really resonate because the meaning that you ascribe to a set of events feels true, feels authentic, reflects, that heart, head, feet, right? In a way that is holistic and makes sense, or it can feel slippery because it's reaching for threads that don't quite add up. And so I think part of the challenge, part of why the last few comments have been asking questions around the words, the leveraging of words like equality and justice, but they feel empty, right? That it's rhetoric. And so I think part of what we see that we're living in this moment, again, because of the rise of social media, like all of these things that make it really easy for image to triumph over substance, for story to triumph over real meaning, for how we engage on a phone to become more powerful than how we engage in a citizens' assembly when we are together in real life. The coffee work that Millie was talking about, the time, the space, the careful work of building, I think is a very different thing to the triumph of narrative. And I think that's part of the problem of abundance. Yeah. It's a really good story.
And I think I agree with that, and adding in that Ezra Klein also had an incredible platform before he even started. He was quite beloved by a lot of people for his podcast, so he already had a kind of weird relationship with people to be the messenger in a way that Albo or me or anyone, he's got a very different thing. In terms of, so I also don't have an answer for what's the alternative narrative, but I things that I've been thinking about. In the Solidarity book, one of the things they talk about is, solidarity is about finding where do our material needs overlap and building connection from there. And so I wonder if, and maybe this is just my pushback against AI and tech, but so much of why there's this really big swing to the right is this kind of loneliness thing and this sense of real precarity. And I think everyone is feeling precarious. It doesn't matter how wealthy people are, or like the world is scary right now. And so there's this real sense of sort of, precarity. And I can't remember the name of the speaker, but I heard at a conference somebody saying, how do we give people a sense of what it feels like to live in the world that we are trying to create? And I really love that, of like, what does it look like? So rather than a poster, like, and Suzanne, this is kind of your area of expertise, I understand it, like the deeper storytelling meaning stuff of like, how is it not just a poster, but that story? And how do we, I love the citizens, the power of the things like the Citizens Assembly, but I think we have such a mistrust in Australia of being consulted, that because it's happened so badly, that it's dangerous. And so again, if I was thinking about what happens when we unmask and just become more human and not less. And so I'm sometimes invited to like, oh, what if you came to this citizens jury thing or whatever? And I often think, how am I going to do this? Like, I've got 2 families I look after. Like, I don't want money, but Catherine's going to laugh if she's still on the call, but like, I want a lasagna for my time, like I want a material piece of care to participate, because I can't work out how to free up other time. And so what would it look like if we if we changed how we engage to be less transactional, less capitalist, as we do this politics, as we do this stuff? And I had this just as a nice story. I have been on my soapbox about lasagna care for a while now, and thinking about what it enables us to do when we feel materially cared for, even if it's not exactly the needs we need met. And I was talking to the TasCos network last week about this, and somebody turned up with a lasagna for me the week later after, and it was this moment of, the lasagna was wonderful, but it was this moment of this imagination that I had coming back in material form. And so I think, what does it look like to play and to breathe life into the different narratives that we have within our own spheres, and cross those boundaries from where we think we're supposed to be professionalized and where we're actually just trying to be humans in a really crazy complex world? Oh yeah, Jethro, you owe some lasagnas. Yeah, get onto the lasagna. But I just think everything is so broken. We don't have to play by the rules anymore, and we can actually bring these interesting things in. So I guess that's not a narrative answer, that's a ramble, but I think it's just being more human, not less, in a weird way.
It's great, Millie. I did a talk in London with some colleagues, Mariana Mazzucato, some of you might know, but Anne-Marie Slaughter was on the panel. She was a great American writer, and she was reacting to the book. And she said it talks about abundance a lot, but it's deeply materialistic. It's only really what we've been talking about. And she said it's distinctly missing an abundance of care. It's like it doesn't talk about it at all. And I think it's so interesting that you home in on that straight away, and there's the relational, not transactional aspects that would be following that. So that would be the extension to the narrative, Jethro. An abundance of care would be an interesting, much more interesting starting point, wouldn't it?
And I think just to echo both of those comments, I feel like we are just, certainly for me, coming out of a period of intense solidarity, of really being part of a movement of people in the pro-Palestine protests, where it wasn't just about showing up on the street with a banner, but it was really about showing a remarkable level of care in building community, of doing exactly that, meal sharing, of, I think some of the greatest lessons I've learned about care have been from Palestinians who have hosted me in their homes and said, oh, thank you for showing up at that talk. And I'm like, are you kidding? But there's something in both what we get back when we show up alongside people is, again, a profound lessons in generosity about how that care is received. So yeah, I think that there are many places to look for those examples of the solidarity that you're talking about, Millie, and they are all around us. And I think, again, part of the issue is that if we look for them in only in policy wonkish ways, it can be disheartening. But if we look for them in the everyday, if we look at them in these, again, these moments of fracture and rupture that we are living through right now, what we see is so much of the connective tissue of what solidarity looks like and feels like is actually already there. and how we talk about it in ways that don't feel horrible, that are hard but don't feel horrible, I think is really, really important. So that again brings us back to narrative. So that's where the narrative work, you know, resides. Yeah.
I have answers, but I can chat to Jethro afterwards. I know you already. So Sarah, I'll pass to you, and then we'll wrap up soon so that we can make sure that everyone gets their evening back.
I just wanted to throw out, I guess, an example of a very recent narrative that feels like kind of an abundance narrative, but just much more effective, which is I don't know if anyone was following the mayoral election in New York, but the Mamdani campaign basically talked through the language of abundance, but backed it up with like policy and infrastructure and care and connection and community. And you could feel like it was felt, it was embodied in the campaign.
Yeah.
You could see it in the people who were supporting him. And so I think to lots of points in the comments, there are narratives, they're happening. You know, that's not a best-selling New York Times book yet, but he is going to be mayor of the, you know, at least most powerful city in the United States. And that's something. So that narrative is not just niche in these small circle book clubs. That's a narrative that has resonance at a much higher level than at least I've seen in my lifetime, certainly in the United States. So excited to see what actually comes of it. But from a narrative and abundance kind of framing, I feel like they nailed it. So, and I cried yesterday at work, and all of my colleagues actually work at the university too, Dan at UniMelb, and everyone was like, what are you crying about? And I was like, I can't explain it. New York, mayor.
And
it's a narrative of regulation, right? It's like, we're going to tax billionaires and we're going to use the money to provision for people's needs to make the city more affordable, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and
very directly counter to the abundance narrative, I think. But yeah.
And my tiny little claim on it is that Mamdani was my lecturer at UCT. The dad,
wow.
the father, Mamdani, the father.
Yeah,
Yes.
amazing, amazing.
All right. Well, on that very positive note, maybe that's a good place to wrap up this conversation. I want to say a massive thank you, especially to Millie, Dan, and Sasonke for joining me on what was a bit of a random experiment, but it's been such a lovely conversation. And thank you as well to everyone who's joined us online and for all of your comments. I'll make sure I save them. I haven't had a chance to properly digest them all and get through them, but I'm looking forward to reading through that afterwards. If there's anything that you want to make sure that the people who are on this call are directed towards, then feel free to send that through to us, and we can we'll send out a bit of a sort of email with all the links and things afterwards. I didn't really talk about it at the start, but I and Joni, who was briefly on the call, I'm not sure if she's still on here, and Elaine, who I think is on here as well, part of an organization called Good Together, who are trying to do things like this, convening people to imagine better futures and try to bring them to life in the places that we live. So events like this one are some of the things that we're trying to do. So I'll make sure that you get the links to come check us out as well, and follow along with other work that we're doing. And we'd love to do another one of these because I think it went pretty well. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks to you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Dan.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.